So this is the Madison ModPo Group, and I'm with Louis, Scott, Roger, and Jim, and I'm Kurt Polish. And we are going to take a look at James Merrill's poem, Annie Hill's Grave. And Scott will lead us.
I think Merrill is an interesting poet to follow Ginsberg because, and I certainly am no expert on this, but my feeling is that if you had to say who's Whitman-esque and who's Emily Dickinson, Merrill falls into the Dickinson mode. I think there's a refinement and simplicity, even though some of his poems are incredibly long. There's a conciseness that's different than Whitman. Reading about Merrill's background, everybody know about his incredible wealth, and his father was the Merrill of Merrill Lynch. Yeah, and they had enormous properties in Southampton and in New York and in Florida, and he lived as a young man in this incredible world of great wealth and insularity. In particular, his mother, who was very supportive of his poetry. However, she was a grande dame in a way. There was one little telling a line that she said to her son one day. They were talking about African Americans, and she was referring to Nellie, who had been the family housekeeper, nanny, et cetera, 30, 40 years. And she was saying to her son one day how wonderful and dear this woman was to her, but she would never shake her hand because one just didn't shake a black person's hand. Merrill rebelled against this kind of narrow-minded, super wealthy, insular crowd, but he rebelled in a very refined fashion. There was an interview I read with him once, and he was talking about literary influences, and he talked about a series of books that I dearly love, The Map and Lucia. Has anybody ever read Map and Lucia?
It's also a series.
It was a television series. It's they're comic pieces, but they poke pins in puff-uppery, if I may coin a word, rebelling against the establishment. And Benson, when he was a young man, was a very influential writer, because that's what he strove to do. Even though he lived very comfortably, it was not part of that New York, West Palm Beach, Southampton confluence. So, anyway, okay, Annie Hill's grave. Amen. The casket, like a spaceship, bears her in streamlined, airtight comfort underground. Necropolis is a nice place to visit. One would not want to live there all year round. So think the children of its dead emerging from shadows by the small, deep gates of clay, exclaiming softly, joyful if bewildered, to see each other rouged, heads bald or gray. Some have not met, though constant to the city for decades. Now their slowly sunnier counterclockwise movement, linked and loving, slackens the whirlpool that has swallowed her. Alone, she grips against confusion, pictures of us the living, and of the tall youth she wed but has not seen for 30 summers. Used to the dark, he lies in the next booth. Part of that whole, poor, overpopulated land of our dreams, that instant space, to have again, just adds stars, wind, and water, shrinkingly broached, and as the brief snail trace of her withdrawal dries upon our faces, the silence drums into her upturned face. Okay. So, the very first word of this was something I was thinking about in terms of reading it out loud. What does that word mean and how to say it? And for me, though it could be interpreted many other ways, the amen is the end of a funeral service. Mm-hmm. It's the lowering of the casket. Everybody.
That's how I read it.
That's all good. Okay. So anyway.
Also, amen means that's the way it is.
Yes.
That's,
finality.
Amen. Mm-hmm.
It's the end of just about everything. I don't know what the Latin or the Greek is, but I think it has to do with finality.
Yeah, so not only the end of the funeral service, but the end of her life.
Right. It's the end of her life, and it's the end of the beginning of the poem. It's strange. You put amen at the beginning of the poem.
And that's why I think it works so well.
It does. It does very well.
And yet, the amen is not an ending for her or for all these other spirits, because it has, I think, a rather positive message here at the end.
I like very much the image and the wording of the casket like a spaceship.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So she's launched into this other world. I also like the recognition of how, plush for the way they dig graves, and the caskets airtight, streamlined, airtight comfort, as if someone has spent a fair amount of money to make sure that this casket is the best.
I'd like to read something right now. Safe in their alabaster chambers, untouched by morning, untouched by noon, sleep the meek members of the resurrection, rafter of satin and a roof of stone.
Mm-hmm. Where did you find that?
That's Emily Dickinson's one of her most famous poems. That just came right to me when I saw this.
Mm.
That helps with my argument about.
Right. Right.
Good. So, anybody else want to?
I would comment on the form of the poem. We have a rhyming of the second and the fourth line in each stanza, and the final couplet where the words are rhymed because they're the same word, face and faces. So it's carefully structured and carefully crafted, the poem. Again, alliteration is always something I look to as the poet stitched together the word, and the Acropolis, a nice place.
Yes.
It practically hits you over the head, doesn't it? And then, of course, then the wording, the way he put it together increases the alliteration increases the power of the irony of that sentence. Necropolis, nice, are not two words that I would think of together.
One of my favorite lines is, and as the brief snail trace of her withdrawal dries upon our faces.
And
Great line.
is that a reference on the notion that she has been put in the earth and the snail tracings?
Yeah, I saw it as
Tears.
People cry at funerals.
It's the tears.
Yes.
But the tears of the people that are now, it's over, and
That's
their
right.
tears are
But-
dry.
And
why a
which
snail?
embodies the connection between the living and the dead here.
But
The
why,
continuity.
but why a snail?
slowness of the drying of the tears. I just forget.
And
Well,
the
also
trace.
snails leave a little goo-goo behind them as they move across.
And the antithesis on the very last line, silence drums into her upturned face. Silence can't drum anything. Silence is silence.
More irony.
Well, but then there's always that expression, the silence was deafening.
Right, and that's antithesis, I think.
And her upturned face, is that a reference to the corpse lying in the
I think
casket?
so. I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
They must have previously had a viewing. I mean, they usually do. I
Yeah.
didn't say that here, but you would see her upturned face there. Yeah, it's in pentameter, not real strict, but pretty strict pentameter, so there's that structure to it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I counted the stanzas to see if it was a sonnet, but it has more.
It's loose, in streamlined, airtight, comfort underground pentameter. But the amen doesn't fit in the first line, so she sticks it in anyway.
I think that many poems will begin with the first syllable ends up being a strong beat.
Right.
What if the second to last stanza, part of the whole poor overpopulated land of dreams, that instant space, so why instant and why in quotes, and then set off by a dash to have again, just add stars, wind, and water. It sounds like easy ingredients to toss together. And I'm not sure what the final product is supposed to be.
I was hoping someone would explain that to me.
That's a line that this land of our dreams, that instant space, I have to say, I don't have an easy answer for that.
Well, our dreams can be instant, right? Because they're under our control.
They are?
Well, in the sense that they're in our heads. Whether they're under control, you're right. It's not
Well,
the
you're
right word.
embodying, you're putting the I and the subconscious together. If they're separate, they're not under our control.
Yeah, they're part of us as opposed to an event happening outside of ourselves. We carry our dreams.
I simply do not understand what he's reconstituting here with stars and wind and water. This whole stanza was to me a mystery.
Well, I think of that as the eternal. The stars, the wind, the water are eternal elements of the
To
whole.
have again, just add, it's like just adding water to post them or something, just add stars and wind and water.
Well, you add water to instant food to create something.
Are we recreating an instant
Yeah.
existence or an instant being or?
Good question.
I don't know.
Good question.
I went to the memorial service for James Merrill. That was sponsored by the Penn Center, which is a poetic literature group. And I think there was, I could never quite get out of my head is here is a man with every possible pleasure in the world that he could afford at all. I think of him as spending a lot of time in Greece, which I think he did, but anyway, this, of all the poems that could be chosen, this is really, he's playing hardball with this. I mean, I always think of the Platonic line, life is not worth living, the unexamined life is not worth living. And he has certainly lived the examined life. But, the little tragedy of people that die of AIDS, he was not that old. I think he was about in his 40s when he died.
Did he have mental problems or not?
Oh, I don't think so. Except that I think what Scott has hinted at in terms of his relationship with this extremely wealthy family, that I would imagine that his father, for instance, said, well, here's another $1,000, you can just stay away for another month, if you don't mind. I think it was difficult to be that environment, and to be gay, and to be a poet. He's a complex, very complex person.
He wasn't institutionalized as far as you know, or depression.
Oh, not at all.
Oh, I got that impression somewhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe he should have been because of all the stress that he lived under. But, he, first of all, he's a very good-looking person, and he had very attractive people that followed him. I mean, he has a coterie around him. I just think this poem is really quite remarkable because there's so many things where he just leaves you up in the air. And I don't know. I just thought he was sort of, a lot of people that knew him thought that he was just too goddamn rich. Because they were sort of envious of this incredible wealth, and then he just happened to be a really talented poet, and that got on people's nerves. Think of all these poor poets scratching out a life, semi-misery and deprivation, coming across this guy.
A little bit more about Merrill. His father actually was amazingly supportive of him wanting to be a writer, and supported that on all sorts of different levels. One of the reasons is that James had an older brother who was following in the pursuit of wealth of the father. So his father had the son that was going in the right direction, and he thought it was nice to have another son who was in the arts, was a nice balance. The mother and father divorced when James was quite a preteen fellow, and it was a very traumatic experience for him. His mother took him off to New York. She didn't get much money in the divorce settlement, and the mother actually had to work, something that she had certainly not dreamed that she was ever going to have to do. Though she worked as a party planner with a friend of hers, and they made tons of money because they had all the right social connections. Merrill was also very interested in both exploring death, also something that he got from his mother, who was a bit of both a hypochondriac and a bit of a Munchausen by proxy over her son's health. Well, we all know what that is, so that's how she got some kind of charge out of being concerned about her son's health. Lastly, he and his longtime companion were obsessed with a Ouija board that they found one day, which brought back. When I first heard that he was interested in Ouija, it's actually what intrigued me about reading The Fading Light of Sandover, which was written entirely through the Ouija board. He and his companion would spend hours and hours and hours on the Ouija writing the poetry. Mm-hmm. They had a medium or a familiar, I think that's the term, a familiar that was speaking to them through the Ouija board to write this very long, I don't know if anybody's read it, it's incredibly long and very complex epic poem. So anyway, maybe he should have been.
I'm not going to rush out.
No, I think I'll...
But, in this poem too, the image of, in the third stanza, now their slowly sunnier counterclockwise movement, linked and loving, slackens the whirlpool that has swallowed her. So whirlpools in the northern hemisphere are, I think they're clockwise, the water motion. So this would be an undoing of that water movement. So it's just this image of being alive somehow, right. even in death.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of escaping that whirlpool.
And their connection to
everybody
her?
that was there got to escape it.
And then her husband, she wed, but is not for 30 summers. Used to the dark, he lies in the next booth. Mm-hmm. Sort of like, little, it's comfortable. You have a booth of some sort. Mm-hmm. In your own private space. But then why land of our dreams? And the second to last stanza. Part of that whole overpopulated land of our dreams. It's almost reminding me of the Ginsberg poem again, Lost in the supermarket poem, because it's is this the imagination of the poet? Is this whole piece where the poet is saying, hey, this is just my imagination here. This is how I think of what may one possibility that has happened to her in her death.
Well, what other land would it be in? Certainly, we don't know.
Well, we don't know. So it's a product of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy. It's accessible. All you have to do is just add stars, wind, and water.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you have to do to make a poem.
That's right. That's all you have to do to make instant macaroni.
Maybe on that note, we should call it a video.
Yes. Okay.